an individual that I haven't seen for years. As a matter of fact, it was on breakfast television a number of years ago that Nejolla Chorus joined me in studio, and I was told that professionally speaking, if anybody could tell that someone in the room was telling a lie, you were the one.
I am the one.
You are the one. You're the CEO of Inter Veritas International. You provide lie detection, social media risk consulting and training, and interrogation training.
I do.
This is intimidating as an interviewer to be interviewing you.
But I'm telling you, Ryan, you don't use the technique on your family and friends, otherwise you won't have any.
Right.
So I seat you in my friends category.
Now, you're not a polygraph person. You sit down and you actually talk to people, and you're hired by what, like police services? You're hired by the courts, by defense lawyers?
I am. It could be a variety of clients. I even sit in with investment firms sometimes listening in on quarterly calls. So it's a whole variety of clientele that can use the methodology.
You mean, so if you would have watched a long interview on television with Bernie Madoff ahead of the collapse, he would have been perhaps tipping you off to the fact that something was amiss?
Absolutely. Actually, in some of my classes, I do use video footage of Bernie Madoff giving interviews, especially when he was head of NASDAQ. So there were all kinds of linguistic triggers, but really it was Harry Markopolos that had been talking about Madoff for many years prior to that.
How can you tell if somebody's lying? We've always heard if somebody's eyes drop, that's a clear signal that they're probably cooking up an alibi or cooking up an alternative fact story.
Yeah,
how do you tell?
That can go into neuro-linguistic programming. For us, it's all, all linguistics. So a person who's telling the truth maintains the same pattern of speaking, and when they're lying, they will alter that pattern of speaking. They'll skip over certain parts of their story. And so what we are listening for are clues to be able to question them on later.
So you want to allow someone to paint themselves into a corner.
Right.
And once they're there, then you circle back to the areas that are already painted, and you say, well, let's revisit this. Tell me about this.
Right. So
not unlike a police detective.
It's the same kind of work, and as a matter of fact, there are many, many police professionals that are trained in this methodology.
The reason you're here, Nejolla, is it caught our attention that the Canadian Embassy, the High Commission in Singapore, is flying you all the way there, and you're going to be speaking at a conference. It's a conference on fake news called Keep It Real, Truth and Trust in Media. Fake news wasn't a thing. In other words, it wasn't a hashtag. It wasn't a part of our lexicon even a year ago, or at least not 2 years ago. But it's become somewhat of a phenomenon. Not just the spread of it, the prominence of it, but also accusations around what is or isn't fake news.
Right. And the fake news phenomenon, I had to wrap my head around it because everybody's been using it really since the Trump campaign. But in essence, fake news is propaganda, misinformation, something that has been around for a long time. It's just adopted a new label right now.
So you're teaching people, or the purpose of this conference is to help people understand how to detect fake news, is that right?
Right. The conference is really being hosted by the World Association of Newspapers in association with the University of Management at Singapore University. So it's bringing in a variety of experts from Google, from Facebook, CNN, legal scholars. And I guess I'm kind of the lie detection and social engineering person that's being brought in by the Canadian group. And I'm talking about how we can combat fake news when we have a series of tools that can spread it so quickly when we're looking through social media. And everybody's got that tendency to like or share something that sounds sensationalist, whether it's truthful or not.
Now, of course, I suppose you can make the argument that in some circumstances fake news is fake news. In other words, something is being reported or proclaimed that did not happen or is not accurate. In other circumstances, the whole idea of beauty in the eye of the beholder, what's fake to someone may not by conviction be fake to someone else. So how do we as members of the public, I mean, what are you going to tell the audience in Singapore? Where do we need to start?
Well, I always say you can lead the horse to water, but you can't make them drink. So again, what is the tendency? I feel like I'm the police officer of my friends on Facebook. Sometimes you see sensationalist things like an Amber Alert being shared. But when you actually look at the missing child report, it happened 3 years ago. So what's the tendency for us to back off a little bit? You know what? My message is also to look at the fake news that is fake. So, for example, when NATO troops landed in the Baltic states a few months ago, within a day, somebody was sending out news reports that one of the German soldiers raped somebody. And upon examination, that was really coming from the Russian camp. So, again, it's governments using tools like social media to spread falsehoods. It's people doing the same thing.
We were just, like as you were sitting in the, we'll call it you were in the bullpen, I guess, waiting to come here and appear on the show. I was talking to Jackson Prosco. He's the Washington bureau chief of the Global National. And we were talking about Donald Trump's response this morning to news breaking yesterday that he's the subject of an investigation into alleged obstruction of justice, and it's Special Agent Robert Mueller that's leading that charge. And the president tweeted this morning, first at 4:55 a.m. and then at 5:57 a.m. They made up a phony collusion with the Russian story. They found zero proof, so now they go for obstruction of justice on the phony story. Nice. He goes on to say, you're witnessing the single greatest witch hunt in American political history led by some very bad and conflicted people. Now, it's my understanding that CNN reached out to you through the presidential election, asked you to appear on the show, but you declined the invitation. Yeah. Why?
Well, because it was clear to me that they were looking at trying to assess whether Donald Trump was lying or not. You have to be able to look at both candidates. Is Hillary Clinton lying? Is Donald Trump lying? And I said there's really a difference when you find somebody like Donald Trump who absolutely, he's not necessarily lying. He's the kind of guy that will never be caught without a response. And he's going to be like a bulldozer and come back strong and hit back at somebody, but he might not be lying. He might be wrong, and I think he was wrong a lot of times in his commentary, but it wasn't necessarily a lie.
So you can be wrong but not lying.
Well, come on, it's a fine line. I think with lying, there is an intent to mislead versus being the bully with the knee-jerk reaction that's just going to come out and, smack us over the head with a response.
So you characterized the Donald at that time, and now he's the president, as the bulldozer that hits back. What was Hillary's style on the campaign trail?
Well, I've used the Clintons as examples for a long time. The Clintons are very, very clever in the way that they answer questions. A lot of times it'll be highly intellectual. It'll kind of twist the answer and change the subject. So they completely avoid the questions versus a Donald Trump that comes out with a barrage of response that kind of hits all of us over the head with it. So two very different styles in answering questions.
So you wouldn't appear on CNN because they wouldn't agree to allow you to evaluate both candidates.
Correct.
I applaud you for that.
Well, thank you.
But that, and this testimony here, is going to fuel the belief that some people have that news organizations like CNN have an agenda. And they're going to hashtag on the text line right now to 630, CNN is fake news. That's a problem for CNN, isn't it?
It's a problem, but I think people have been doing that for months during that campaign.
But if on a radio show like this, Nejolla, if I only talk about the right? If I only talk, let's say provincially speaking, if I only talk about Brian Jean and Jason Kenney and we sit and we hammer on them, but we're never tough on the government, we're never tough on the NDP, then that will fuel the fire that some people will say burns against conservatives.
Right.
And vice versa, right? If I only target the NDP all the time and I give conservatives a pass, people will say, well, there's no balance here. And they'd be right.
Right. And that's one of the things, too, that we see on social media. People are either picking and choosing which side am I supporting. Am I giving a fair and balanced reporting on both? Sometimes you can't give a fair and balanced reporting on both. But if you're asking somebody like me as an expert to come on and say what you're asking me to tell the public, I'm not going to do it because I also have a reputation I have to look after.
Obviously. I mean, your whole brand is built on integrity.
Yes.
If the person who's detecting liars is found to be a liar, you're not getting hired anymore.
Correct.
When we come back, can I ask for a few of your talking points that you're going to deliver in Singapore? It's the title of your presentation that's really caught my eye. Elves versus trolls. Lessons from citizen activists in the battle against misinformation. We know all about trolls, but who are the elves? More with Nejolla Chorus of Inter Veritas International on CHED right after these. Our guest in studio, Nejolla Chorus of Inter Veritas International. You're essentially a professional BS detector, right? I mean,
yes.
That's what you do.
Yes.
Yeah. A listener on the text line here says, and I don't know what I'm walking into, but I'm happy to read it because I've got nothing to hide. Says, get your guest to tell us if you were lying or telling the truth about my pillow. The listener goes on to say, I took your advice, Ryan, and now we also have pillows for my wife and my daughter, and thank you for that. Could you tell that I was sincere?
Well, you certainly sounded sincere, Ryan. It didn't really seem like you were forced. And, you know, somebody with a really good night's sleep is going to be a little bit more relaxed.
So I made it past the professional BS detector.
You made it past.
My pillow is going to be thrilled to hear it.
Your pillow's good, and I didn't really see you reading copy, so that's a good sign.
That's right. I don't read copy. Nejolla, some hilarious comments on the text line. Tiny Tim says, you can't let this woman anywhere near a political institution. It would be absolute pandemonium. Listeners are saying they want to buy you a drink. They love your honesty about CNN and Trump and Clinton. They're curious to know what you make of the messaging around our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau.
You know what? I have to be honest. I have been on the road a lot this year, and I like his messaging. From a lie detection point of view, I'm not picking up a lot of insincere commentary or commentary that is defensive or trying to push things away from people. He's really trying to engage.
Let me ask you what you make of his delivery. There are a lot of ums and ahs, and it strikes me sometimes as though he's really, really working hard. There's a lot of mental activity going on, trying to very carefully pick his words. What message does that send you?
You know what? Ums and ahs sometimes do show that a person is really thinking about what they're going to say. And I'd much rather have that than somebody comes out with a very canned response that they've actually rehearsed before they've come in.
Okay, so it doesn't automatically indicate a lack of confidence in the answer or some sort of cover-up.
No. That is absolutely not a sign of a cover-up. If you're doing some ums and ahs, yeah, you could be hesitating and thinking about your answer. But from a leadership point of view, I would rather hear that than some stock answer.
Okay.
Yeah.
I talked to Paula Simons from the Edmonton Journal a short time ago. I know you were actually listening. I thank you for listening, by the way. We were talking about Barry Winters. He's been described as perhaps the nastiest troll in the province of Alberta. Earned him a charge of promotion of hatred from the EPS hate crimes unit. What do you make of the whole trolling thing? I know you're actually going to address this. You're going to speak to this at this conference in Singapore. It's not a new phenomenon, but the platforms have sure grown.
Yeah, the platforms have become out of control, and I kind of struggle. It was interesting to hear Paula's take on freedom of speech, but our freedom of speech has gone into a completely negative area where we live in a society almost where it is a fad to be offended by everything that you see. So I do believe that there has to be something done because I think it's free speech gone wild. And we certainly don't see this in countries like Singapore. I just came home from South Africa. You don't see that kind of negativity.
Although in Singapore you get caned for spitting on the street, though, don't you?
Sure, and chewing gum.
Yeah,
but
so that's not exactly...
Maybe that's a deterrent. I don't know.
No, thanks. Well, you're on your way to Singapore in 3 days from now, 4 days from now. A guest of the High Commission there, the Canadian Embassy is bringing you over. I don't know if there's a greater endorsement, so congratulations on a professional front.
Thank you.
You'll be presenting Elves versus Trolls, Lessons from Citizen Activists in the Battle Against Misinformation. We know who the trolls are. Who are the elves?
So there have been movements on social media by citizen groups in various countries to try and battle some of the fake news and misinformation. I referred earlier to rape charges being alleged against NATO soldiers that landed in the Baltics. And, for example, in Lithuania, there is a citizen group, and they do call themselves the Elves. It's a group of tech professionals who, in their free time, monitor social media feeds, look for groups that incite hatred, and are now working with Facebook to get those kinds of sites pulled down. So I really believe that there is a movement. If anybody's ever had a problem with Facebook, it's really, really hard to get them to try and fix something if you've been bullied, for example. I had a client who wanted some retaliation against me at some point. He wasn't my client. He was on the other side. But created a fake profile and put my dead brother's picture on the profile picture. When I tried to report it to Facebook, they wouldn't let me through. Basically, they told me that you have to ask the person who is being impersonated to pull down that profile picture, which is kind of hard to do if you're no longer alive. So there has to be movement with social media to allow maybe citizen groups to report fake news, to have an impact when they're reporting bullying, hate speech, and so on. Everybody's looking for some sort of algorithm or computer program to fix it, but that certainly isn't enough.
Well, Facebook, in the last, I guess, I don't know, I say 6 months or so, maybe at least in the last year, has been very public about its purported commitment to cracking down on fake news that's being presented on its platform. Probably mostly they just don't want to be liable in some circumstances. Yeah. There's an interest in their fight against fake news. How would you characterize or how would you assess Facebook's, and for that matter, Twitter and Instagram and Snapchat and whatever else? I mean, how are they doing?
Facebook is being represented at this conference in Singapore, so I'm really curious to hear what they have to say about it. Most of them are adopting a new software called I think it's called Crosscheck. And so, again, it's going to be an algorithm pulling down fake news. But it isn't stopping who's spreading it, and that becomes the problem.
Would you qualify a group like Anonymous as elves? What do you make of Anonymous?
That's an interesting question. You know what? Talking to some of my professional colleagues, I work with penetration testers. Some of them think that parts of Anonymous are a joke, that they're not the elite. But I think Anonymous has a role to play, and because there's support for them, people are saying that there's a need for them.
This is, we're out of time, so I'm just going to let you read the text line, okay? When we go off the air. You've really resonated with our audience.
Great, I'm happy.
And I'm going to have to insist that you're going to come back.
I'd love to.
Will you agree to do that?
Absolutely.
I'm thinking we can cook up some idea of, I do these Friday roundtables 11 to noon. Maybe we could get you in here with, we'll put you in here with a couple suspected liars, and we'll just get you to sit in the middle. What do you think?
I'll do it.
That sounds good?
I'd be happy
That's a verbal contract.
It is a verbal contract.
Nejolla Corr is the CEO of Inter Veritas International, on her way to Singapore to represent Canada, a leading expert in lie detection and deception in social media. What an interesting field. Here's the news at 11:30 sharp.